The new Treasurer, in his first press conference, made clear that on one issue at least, there will be no backsliding by the Turnbull government. This is still a government that thinks spending is too high, and he repeated another Abbott slogan to stress tax cuts are needed.
I think taxes should be lower and simpler and fairer.
Joining me are former Labor campaign strategist Bruce Hawker and John Roskam, head of the Institute of Public Affairs. Scott Morrison, are you reassured by him?
I am. Andrew, Scott Morrison is absolutely right. You can't tax yourself into prosperity. It's a really important message, and already he's defined himself as different from Joe Hockey.
Well, in what sense? Because the slogans are exactly the same.
Well, no, it wasn't just slogans. Joe Hockey raised taxes. Tony Abbott broke his promise not to raise taxes. If Malcolm Turnbull and Scott Morrison don't raise taxes, that will be a very, very good start.
But the whole idea of simpler, fairer, lower taxes and all that is Tony Abbott's mantra. I think the difference might be, and Joe Hockey's, the difference might be that Morrison seems to have a cut-through. I can't really define it.
Well, I think he is authentic. People like that. They've seen him in his work around the boats, and they think this is a fellow who actually delivers on what he says. So he's got a start in this, Andrew. The question will be, of course, how do you make the taxes fairer and lower and simpler without doing, without hurting some people along the way? Are they going to increase the GST by 50%, for example? Well, that may be simpler, but I don't know that it's going to be fairer. So it's going to come down to what they actually do. They can talk it at the moment, and that's fine. It's the honeymoon period, and the Prime Minister's having a good run with it. Morrison's having a good opening session. But how are they going to be after lunch? That's going to be the question.
But this is true, John, because the selling might be more incisive and sharper, but the direction is still the same. We've got to cut spending. We don't have a revenue problem. We've got a spending problem. Taxes got to be lower. But the economic realities are still there. Huge deficits, etc.
That's true, Andrew, but one of the things Turnbull and Morrison, I think, will do better than Abbott and Hockey, which is communicate, explain why we need to make these changes. And when you look back at all the reasons why Tony Abbott is no longer Prime Minister, one of the reasons is we were told we had a budget crisis. I think we do have very serious budget problems, but then it was months and months and months before we started to find out what the solution was. Morrison and Turnbull won't fall into that mistake.
But they still have got the Senate. That's one of the reasons that Tony Abbott and Joe Hockey couldn't get much done is the Senate was feral and rejected so much of what they tried to do, and the Senate's still the Senate.
The Senate's still the Senate, and he's going to actually have to go to the next election with a package of reforms. And that's going to be where the people are going to have to be making up their mind about whether they like what they see about Malcolm Turnbull or don't. As I said, it's good to be an early start. They've had a good early start, but are they going to be batting after lunchtime with that team intact? I don't know.
No, well, I'll say this, though, Bruce. One thing that is in the advantage of Turnbull and Morrison is that Turnbull seems to have a better relationship with the crossbenchers, who are key here, the independents, etc. And Morrison has had a track record of making deals with them to get his things through as social services.
They've reached out. In the last week, we found out that some of the crossbenchers hadn't really been contacted by the coalition or by Tony Abbott. Already Malcolm Turnbull is reaching out. So I think there's a degree of optimism that is potentially
Well, let's be no doubt. Malcolm Turnbull is a much better politician than Tony Abbott. He is very good at selling a message. He's got an easy charm. He's steering the political agenda into what he considers to be the middle ground. And the public so far is responding well to that. Yeah. But the proof of the pudding is going to be in the eating.
But I tell you what, for all people, social conservatives are saying, oh, well, look, Turnbull's going to wrench the party to the left. It may well be that to compensate or to establish his credentials, he may be better on things like financial prudence, cutting the budget, and going tough on unions. It's very tough on the union message.
There's all of that. And remember, one of the things that Tony Abbott disappointed, I think, not just conservatives, but many, many people, was on freedom of speech. It wasn't Tony Abbott, it wasn't Malcolm Turnbull who broke Tony Abbott's promise on freedom of speech. It wasn't Malcolm Turnbull.
I don't think you're going to get your thing on 18C through Malcolm Turnbull. Well, I don't think it's going to go there.
We certainly didn't get it from Tony Abbott, despite his promises. Tony Abbott promised not to raise taxes. Now, Tony Abbott did many important good things, but he also let down a lot of people.
But the party wouldn't wear it and the Senate wouldn't wear it, so it doesn't matter.
Andrew, that is not the case.
Well, let's see. If Malcolm Turnbull does it, that'll be really interesting.
But this is the interesting time, though, isn't it, really? When it gets down to the tough questions about what you do with your budget, where you make your cuts, that's where the public start looking and saying, oh, gee, is this going to be good for me or not?
That's true. The battles are still there.
That was a problem for hockey.
Absolutely. But that puts the wood now a little bit on Shorten, because you can't keep saying, no, the problems are real, and Malcolm Turnbull may be better at saying they're real, and Labor can't just keep saying no, and, you know. Should Bill Shorten change his style? He says no.
We're on the right track, and we will not, regardless of the salesman from the Liberals, we aren't going to change who we are or what we are.
Is that a mistake?
Look, I think Bill Shorten's got to really step up now, and I think he's got to be bigger than the party he leads. I think Labor has only ever led into government by politicians who are bigger than their party. That means that he has to be able to, you know, slap the unions in the face when he wants to do it. He has to be able to come up with some bold policies which match Turnbull. He can't just become a commentator like me. He's got to be out there actually saying, I'm the alternative Prime Minister. And right now, he's got his work cut out for him because Turnbull's having such a good period leading his party and the government into this middle ground. It's taking a lot of the air out of the Labor Party, and that's a big problem for Labor. So Bill Shorten has to get bigger and bolder. I really do believe that Labor leaders have to crash through or crash.
So big policies are needed from Bill Shorten?
Potentially, yes. And Malcolm Turnbull has succeeded in making Labor look old and left-wing. And Malcolm Turnbull, if he succeeds, can take the right and the centre, and that will push Labor to the left, and when they move to the left, as they're doing now, they'll get eaten by the Greens.
That's a problem. Yeah, absolutely right. That's absolutely true. I mean, you know, look at some of the candidates we put into the field. In the Northern Territory, Lingiari, Warren Snowden, he's 65 years old. He's not even on the front bench of the Labor Party, and yet, you know, he's going to be the next candidate again for the Labor Party. We could have some young Indigenous leader who's ready to take Canberra by storm. But what do? You know, we pre-select some bloke who is well past his use-by date.
What's Warren done to you?
Well, I can tell you, it's not just him. Don't look at others. You know, Wayne.
Kim Carr. What about Kim Carr? Let's retire Kim Carr.
Turnbull's ministry versus Bill Shorten's shadow ministry. Turnbull's ministry is characterised by women, youth, enthusiasm.
And inexperience. That's just one thing. Look, I'll tell you what,
plenty of women in
Bill Shorten seemed to miss Tony Abbott during a tour of Victoria University this week. Have a look.
We get a picture of you with Tony.
Never mind. I'm sure you'll be feeling better next week.
Yeah. A bit ungracious, really, though, wasn't it?
Oh, it's politics, Andrew.
Yeah, that's what I think. Tony Abbott was there playing cricket, and everyone else is playing cage fighting. But anyway, more from the panel after this, including all that backstabbing. A lot of Liberals are still furious about Malcolm Turnbull's coup. And this week, Tony Abbott, caught breathless after surfing, accused Scott Morrison of not telling the truth when he claimed he'd warned Abbott's office of the plot against him.
I said on Friday to the Prime Minister's office that I thought things were pretty febrile and they should be on high alert.
Scott never warned anyone. Certainly he never warned me. I spoke to him on Friday. Not a hint of a warning. Yeah. So I'm afraid Scott badly misled people. He badly misled people.
Abbott's former Chief of Staff, Peter Credlin, also hit back at the Liberal MPs who'd complained she was too controlling.
And if you're a Cabinet Minister or a journalist and you're intimidated by the Chief of Staff of the Prime Minister, well, maybe you don't deserve your job.
That led some Liberals to warn that if Credlin didn't shut up, they'd really dish the dirt on her conduct. I'm back with John Roskam and Bruce Hawker. John, how damaging is this?
What sense?
To the Liberals.
Well, it won't be damaging if Malcolm Turnbull wins the next election. I think...
No, but this is a spoke in that wheel to winning the next election.
Oh, look, I'm not sure most people care that much. I think they're more focused on Turnbull versus Shorten. Look, certainly there are internal dynamics that are interesting to people like us, but people are actually going to be judging the government and the opposition on results, and and policies.
But you've been through this, Bruce, when you were with Kevin Rudd and he got toppled by Julia Gillard. Does any of this look familiar to you?
I think the circumstances are very different. I mean, I think there was much more surprise about the removal of Rudd than there was about the removal of Abbott. Abbott was on notice, and frankly, he really hadn't managed to come up to the expectations of his caucus in those 6 months after he nearly was removed in February. So it's different, but it's also not a good look, particularly if this sort of history war thing that we're engaging in right now turns into leaks. And if it's active leaking against the government, out of cabinet and elsewhere, then that's where it becomes a real problem for them, because it looks like it's a government divided. As soon as you get into that space, it's not good news.
Not just divided, but not even focused on what Australians really want them to be focused on.
Indeed, yeah.
The other thing, though, about that, John, is I think Malcolm Turnbull so far, I think, made most of the right noises, the right steps, no real changes. I've got to give, as a Conservative, I've got to give him credit. I think the heat will only go on if the polls go south, and he hasn't got much of a lead to play with.
And if the ABC and Fairfax turn on Turnbull as well. But Malcolm Turnbull got the leadership based on his promise to improve the Liberals at the polls, and he's going to be judged on that, but there could well be a honeymoon that could last months, if not years.
Well, look, Tony Abbott's interviews yesterday saying his policies were good because Turnbull had kept them, letting it be known that Turnbull challenged when he did, because the result in the Canning by-election, everyone knew from the internal polling, would actually be good for Tony Abbott, and then the chance of a change would be lost. What do you make of that?
I think that's partly true. I think there are some policy changes. We've previously spoken about Joe Hockey increasing taxes. Malcolm Turnbull has put industrial relations back on the agenda. And as you were talking about with Josh Frydenberg, there's a discussion about penalty rates. Now, business, Conservatives, many Liberals were terribly disappointed Tony Abbott took that off the table.
But there may have been a reason for that, because he didn't want the war with the unions. So this is how
I don't think,
but this is the problem that he's got. If he actually does start going down that path, and as he probably is going to have to, then it opens up a can of worms for him. For example, are we going to go back to seeing Australian workplace agreements either in reality or by stealth? I mean, don't forget that was where the unions actually ran a very effective campaign against John Howard. This is why Abbott had these issues off the agenda, because they were so damaging to him.
I'll give you a perfect example of exactly the sort of thing you're talking about. I thought Mal Brough, the new Special Minister of State, ran into exactly this problem when he said, why didn't the Abbott government push ahead with Senate reforms that stopped the election of micro-candidates?
Rub it in their face.
Immediately to be confronted with exactly the problem that Abbott realised, that they then start saying, well, we're not going to pass a thing through the Senate unless you back off.
Yeah. Well,
and then Mal Brough to go, whoa, backwards.
No, the difference will be, I think Turnbull will try harder and Morrison will be better.
All right, well, let's see.
Well, maybe Morrison will be, but, one of the first things they're going to do is put the submarines in Australia. They're going to be built in Australia. That'll increase the cost of them by about 30%. So we talk about saving money. We talk about the revenue versus spend problem that's very real. But, when you do those sorts of things, understand that there's going to be a cost to the budget. It'll probably be in the order of about $10 billion. I don't think it's a bad thing to have Australians making the submarines, but there's going to be a cost.
Well, that's what worries me. That's what worries me, actually, that they, to hell with the cost, to hell with the national interest, let's just buy some votes. Turnbull's new ministry. Now, experienced people are out. Erica Betts, Kevin Andrews, Hockey, Abbott himself, Ian McFarlane. Fresher and younger people are in. That's and particularly women, and obviously that helps sell the policies, etc. But the problem is, of course, experience counts, doesn't it?
But so does enthusiasm. I think Josh Frydenberg gave an outstanding interview just earlier. There's people now whose careers are going to be defined by the success of the Turnbull government, and that's, I think, different from some of the ministers who we lost in the Abbott government. There's enthusiasm. The fact is, Malcolm Turnbull's nearly 10 years older, more than 10 years older than Bill Shorten. Who's looking younger? Who's looking enthusiastic? Who's looking more optimistic? And I think that's reflected in the Turnbull ministry.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. That is right. I mean, you've got to have this generational change. and he's done this job well. He's brought more women into the cabinet, and he's brought young, enthusiastic people in. You see this happening, you know, when you get these changes and you get young people in there. They want to do things, and you know, that's an added challenge for Labor.
So it doesn't worry you that someone like Marise Payne, who's been in politics for Parliament for 20 years. Yeah. Erica Betts is 21, so there's not much difference there. She finally gets a senior ministry. It happens to be defence. That doesn't worry you that, you know, you got someone...
You know what? I think that was one of the better decisions, frankly.
Because she's a woman?
No, because she's got a lot of experience. She's worked on those committees, overseeing these processes.
No one gave her a senior ministry in her 20 years before.
And maybe that was a mistake. But I'm not going to go here and defend Marise Payne. I'm just making the point that you do have to have change.
All right, very quickly, John, the Pope visited the United States this week to preach his new religion. Have a listen.
It seems clear to me also that climate change is a problem we can no longer be left to a future generation.
He didn't say much about Christianity, but he had lots to say about global warming in his address to the Senate, etc., the House of Reps. Hey.
Andrew, as a Catholic, I'm terribly disappointed in the Pope. He doesn't talk about free market. He doesn't speak about capitalism getting people out of poverty.
Maybe he doesn't believe that. Maybe he just doesn't believe that.
Socialists in the Vatican.
Why shouldn't he be talking about their living conditions and the air that's breathed by good Christian people around the world? I think it's entirely appropriate.
You think global warming emissions, carbon dioxide, is about what the air you breathe?
Of course, it's all got to do with that.
Are you seriously believe that?
Well, look at the pollution that you're seeing in China right now. That at least they're trying to do something about.
Global warming, not pollution. This is what drives me nuts. That an intelligent man like you falls for this spin.
And by the way, you know, what happens when these countries start getting inundated with water or their crops fail? Of course it's appropriate for the Pope to be talking about that.
Look, we've got to go. I'll get you back on this one. Thank you very much, John Roskam and Bruce Hawker. Coming up, the media's love affair with Turnbull goes way, way over the top after this.